Hi everyone, welcome back to class. Now let's classify different metabolic pathways. Maybe they are catabolic pathways or they are anabolic pathways. Now, first, let's start with this catabolic pathway. Always remember, let me put it here. This catabolic is breakdown. Breakdown is what catabolism is all about. Anabolism is build up. Now, for these catabolic pathways, let's start with that first. One, we have glycolysis. Glycolysis is the process that helps us in breaking down glucose molecule to give us two molecules of pyruvate. And through that process, it will give us two molecules of ATP and also two molecules of NADH. There's a class of glycolysis. I've also leave that link in the description so that you can go and understand it very well. So glycolysis is under catabolic pathway because it's helping us to break down glucose to pyruvate. Number two, we have the citric acid cycle. Is it also known as the Krebs cycle? So, and what happened in this pathway is that our product that we get from glycolysis, which is pyruvate, will be converted to acetyl CoA by the work of pyruvate dehydrogenase complex enzyme. Please go to that glycolysis class so that you understand this my explanation, and also the integration parts. You'll be able to understand it very well. So the acetyl CoA that is now gotten from the enzyme complex will now be what we enter into this cycle. So the acetyl CoA will now be broken down to also give us energy. So that's number two under this catabolic pathway. Another catabolic pathway is beta oxidation. This catabolic pathway, what it does that it helps us to break down fatty acids. It helps us to break down fatty acids to give us acetyl CoA. And that acetyl CoA can also enters into the TCA here. Another catabolic pathway is oxidative phosphorylation, and that process involves the transfer of electrons to oxygen, and through that process there is production of energy, and which even give more energy concentration in the cell. And this can also be linked to electron transport chain. This is where all electron carriers such as NADH, FADH, when those electron carriers, when they enters into the electron transport chain, they will deposit the electron there, which now works with this phosphorylation process and gives energy. So that is the fifth, let's say fifth one now. Another catabolic pathway is urea cycle. What happened in urea cycle is that ammonia will enter into this urea cycle, and it will now be broken down, and there will be release and removal of urea, which is toxic to the system. So it will now help us to remove urea from the ammonia that enters, and it will be excreted out. Another catabolic pathway is protein degradation. This process helps to break down proteins into amino acids. Degradation of proteins that are amino acids that are building blocks of protein. So protein degradation is just the process that helps in breaking down of proteins into amino acids. Another pathway is amino acid degradation. Help us to now break amino acid down into their carbon skeleton. These carbon skeletons will now enter into the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle. So these are catabolic pathways. which involve the breakdown and also generation of energy. Now, let's move on to the anabolic pathways, which involve build up to get new products, and through this process it consume energy. It consume energy. Even if it produce energy in the pathway, it store the energy that it produce. So now let's take them one by one also. One, we have gluconeogenesis. Don't be scared with the sound of this name. Let's break it down. Gluconeogenesis, at least you know genesis, creation. Gluconeo now, meaning creation or getting glucose from non-glucose sources. We want to generate glucose, but what is available now is they are not sources of glucose, they are non-glucose sources. So the process of generating glucose from non-glucose sources is what we known as what we known as gluconeogenesis. So, and with that, it's giving us new products, which is our glucose, meaning that it's also building up and consuming energy. The number two, glycogenesis. Glycogenesis. Let's break it down also. Genesis, that means you want to create. Glyco, meaning that creation of glycogen. Glycogen, this happens when you have enough glucose, or this happens when there is enough glucose and the body needs to store it. The body now converts glucose into glycogen that can be stored. So now when there is depletion of glucose, this glycogen will now be broken down and we get our glucose again. So that's another example under anabolic pathway. Now let's move on. The third example, lipogenesis. Let's break it down. Creation, genesis. You want to now lipids. So what lipogenesis mean is that synthesis of fatty acid and triglycerides. So that is the product we are getting from here. From here we are getting glucose from non-glucose source. From here you will get glycogen for storage. Here now you are now getting fatty acid, you are getting triglyceride. Let's move on. Another pathway that is under anabolic pathway, protein synthesis. Here what happens is that there is assembling of amino acids together to give us protein. Remember that under our catabolic pathway, we have protein degradation, we have amino acid degradation. But here, protein synthesis, we are now assembling all those amino acids together to now give us protein. So our product that we are getting or that we are building up here is a new protein. Now, let's move to another pathway. Number 5, amino acid synthesis. What happens here is that we want to produce new amino acids. Then how does that one work? There will now be these amino acids are produced from the intermediates of glycolysis and TCA cycle, meaning that all those from, let's take our glycolysis for example. We have glucose to glucose phosphate to fructose phosphate. All those glucose, fructose phosphate, glucose phosphate are different intermediates. So now those intermediates that are there in glycolysis and the ones that are there in the Krebs cycle, we can now get amino acid can be synthesized from them. So what we are getting here is amino acid. pathway, under this anabolic pathway. Number 6, cholesterol synthesis. Here, what we want to produce is cholesterol. And where are we producing it from? From our acetyl CoA. Another pathway under this anabolic pathway. Number 7, steroidogenesis. This means the synthesis of steroids. Another one that we have here is nucleotide synthesis. Here, what are we synthesizing? Nucleotide. Let's do a quick recap. Anabolic pathway, is the build up to get a new product. Now, number 1, gluconeogenesis, where we are getting glucose from non-glucose sources. Number 2, glycogenesis, where there is conversion of glucose to glycogen for storage. Another one, lipogenesis, where we synthesize fatty acids and triglycerides. Another one, protein synthesis, where there is assembly of amino acids to give us new protein. Amino acid synthesis, here this is where intermediates from glycolysis pathway from TCA can now be used to synthesize new amino acids. Cholesterol synthesis, here we want to synthesize cholesterol, we want to produce cholesterol from acetyl CoA. Steroidogenesis, here production of steroids. Here nucleotide synthesis, the production of nucleotide. These are under anabolic pathway. And under catabolic pathway, now those are the pathways that we have there. Now, apart from all these pathways, now we now have some pathways that can both serve as 1, catabolic pathway, 2, anabolic pathway. Such pathways are called amphibolic pathways. Amphibolic pathway. Number 1 example here is TCA, the citric acid cycle. It can help you to, from there you break down acetyl CoA, and it releases energy. From there also, the intermediates of that pathway can also enter into different pathway to build up new products. So number 1 under that is TCA. Number 2 pathway there is PPP, pentose phosphate pathway. So I want us to limit our example to this. Although we still have different metabolic pathways, but these are the most common pathways that you can hear people mention, you hear people talk about. So let's limit our example to these ones. Now, by now, I'm sure that when next you hear somebody mention metabolism or metabolic pathways or catabolic pathways or anabolic pathway, you will be able to understand what the person is actually referring to. So with this, we've come to the end of today's class. See you in the next class. Bye bye.